The intended provisions and the unintended consequences of this bill will most certainly have a chilling effect on our ability to recruit and retain good police officers. Overall, House Bill 3653 will lead to reduced public safety and a decline of the ability of the police to do their jobs. One of our concerns is the end of cash bail, which we believe has major public safety issues. There are numerous examples from across the country, from New York to California, as to why ending cash bail is a bad idea. Under this bill, we have significant concerns that criminals who commit acts of violence and other dangerous crimes, such as robbery, burglary, and arson, will be right back out on the streets within days, able to victimize more people. This is not acceptable. What we're hearing from police officers, police chiefs, county sheriffs, and deputies, as well as state police troopers, is that they are concerned for their safety and the safety of their communities going forward. As for the safety concerns for officers, there are significant changes in this bill on the use of force statute, which will create uncertainty for officers going forward. Also, this bill allows for unlimited anonymous complaints against officers. It requires all complaints against officers to be stored in a state database forever, unless there's a change in law, with no opportunity for expungement of unfounded or frivolous complaints. These concerns are compounded by the process by which the bill passed. This over 700-page bill was passed in the Senate at 4 in the morning, after being filed just an hour earlier. It was voted on in the House that same morning. Now, while committees had subject matter hearings on the bill leading up to the vote, the actual language of the bill was changed up until 3 a.m. on the day the bill passed. This process resulted in a bill with conflicting definitions and ambiguous language. An example of this problem is the newly created duty to intervene, a concept which most officers support. Now remember, this bill is actually a combination of two bills: the original Criminal Justice Omnibus Bill, which was House Bill 163 then, and an expanded police decertification bill. These bills were combined in the middle of the night, and that included in those two bills was two separate definitions for the duty to intervene. This lack of clarity will also create uncertainty for officers, particularly given that an officer could potentially be decertified as a police officer based on that conduct. Our final remedy to stop this well-intentioned but bad bill from becoming law is for Governor Pritzker to veto House Bill 3653. Our caucus is open to working with law enforcement groups and criminal justice reform advocates to address inequities. However, a rushed omnibus bill passed in the middle of the night on the last day of the lame duck session of the 101st General Assembly is not how we get there. Governor Pritzker, veto House Bill 3653. With that, I'll now turn it over to Representative David Freeze.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm newly elected state representative for the 116th district, which encompasses all of Randolph County, Monroe County, part of St. Clair, and part of Perry County. As Leader Durkin mentioned, I'm here in Red Bud. I've actually served on the city council for years before becoming state representative. And on city council, as you can imagine, we have to produce a budget and we have to balance our budget. And when this came about, I actually reached out to local law enforcement. I talked to our local police chief, and one of his big concerns is the fact that this is a unfunded mandate. He's not opposed to body cameras. I talked to him at length about this. He's convinced he does his job right, his officers do their job right. He's not concerned about body cameras. He's got no objection. The problem from his perspective is the fact that he's going to have to buy body cameras on his own budget. We're going to have to, the city would have to buy software and probably hire somebody to manage downloading all the body cameras, keeping the software up to date, and it's just a complete unfunded mandate that the city of Red Bud and probably every other small municipality, we just can't afford. The state should not enforce spending mandates on municipalities of this nature. Another problem is the fact that an officer, if he is involved in an incident, he's not going to have an opportunity to review the body camera footage before generating a report. This is going to put that officer in a terrible situation, because imagine yourself in a very high stress situation where you're involved in an altercation or perhaps a shooting, You got adrenaline flowing, and if you do not create or generate a report which is identical to the footage on the body camera, that's going to put that officer, he's going to be subject to disciplinary proceedings and possibly termination. That is completely unacceptable. There is no reason why a police officer cannot and should not be able to review body camera footage before having to generate a report with regards to an incident. In addition, additional unfunding mandate is the annual reporting procedures that are going to be required that come along with this. Again, I question why the state legislature puts this additional burden on small municipalities, but they just do not have the funding to do this. Finally, an additional funding issue is this is going to cause additional funding problems due to FOIA requests. I can't imagine all the FOIA requests that are going to come into local police departments. In addition to, if there's court proceedings, you're going to have requests from all kind of court proceedings that involve incidents. Again, this, as Patrick and Leader Durkin mentioned, this must be vetoed by the governor. We've got to have an opportunity to rework these issues. Redbud and every other municipality in my district, it is just not in our budget. We cannot afford this. Thank you for your time. With that, I turn that over to Trooper Joe Moon.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Leader Durkin for inviting me to this press conference. My name is Joe Moon. I'm the president of Illinois Troopers Lodge 41. Troopers Lodge 41 represents 1,587 active troopers in the state, also 1,669 retired officers, troopers, many of which are still in the ranks for different sheriff's departments and municipalities. So I want to first explain the fact that Troopers Lodge 41 had no part in seeing the 700+ page legislation that came out. There's a lot of misconception out there that law enforcement was involved. In fact, law enforcement wasn't involved. They were made aware of some concepts that were out there, but they had no physical input, and it's apparent by the legislation that was passed. The legislation that was passed has law enforcement has serious concerns about. We didn't review any of the language, and because of that, we would ask that the governor veto the language. There are good parts of the legislation. Not all is bad, and I want to make it clear, law enforcement in the state of Illinois is not opposed to police reform. Police reform is not a bad thing when it's done correctly. And the 700 plus pages of this bill, unfortunately, will put citizens in Illinois at risk. Some of the non-custodial arrest changes for certain misdemeanors are problematic. Some of the use of force language is problematic. And the fact that they rammed at the last minute, in the middle of the night, all of these bills together and then didn't run them through committee and put them out for a vote in the House, and I put them out for a vote in the House and didn't have full discussion on those bills and full vetting, and it passed is very, very concerning as an Illinois citizen. And I personally want to thank Leader Durkin and the Republican caucus for standing with law enforcement and the handful of Democrats that came over and voted against this bill as well. I will say that a portion of the final bill, that the 700 some pages that went out, in the decertification and licensing part, we were trying to work. Law enforcement was trying to work with the Attorney General on. However, before that could happen, this was all rammed together and shoved out in the lame duck session for a vote. So and that's unfortunate. I will tell you that because of this, I've had many members call and express their concern about continuing, if they're close to retirement, about continuing to do this profession without the support of the state of Illinois. I've had new troopers reach out to me and say, you know, if this bill passes, they will have to seriously consider for their safety and for their family continuing to do this job. So there are severe repercussions if this bill passes. And, you know, on behalf of all of the troopers and retirees that I represent, I would ask the governor to veto this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. We have several questions. We'll get to as many as we can. First question, Dave Dahl at WTAX. What level of reform would you accept?
I can answer with some of the points. Trooper Moon, I believe, hit on some of them already, that things that are in the bill that are acceptable. I mentioned the duty to intervene in my presentation. That concept is something that's supported broadly in law enforcement. It's just a matter of the way the bill was constructed that creates a problem. There was additional aid for crime victims and crime victims compensation that was supported. Whistleblower protections, first responder deflection was included. Also, a couple body cams and new training are supported, but there has to be a funding mechanism, especially for smaller jurisdictions. And then again, the police officer certification or decertification structure. There was efforts made to clean that up or to fix it. Unfortunately, as was mentioned, was thrown in at the last minute before those changes could be finalized, and here we are with it. So it's not as if our caucus or we're saying that there's no reform we're going to accept. It's just a matter of making sure it's done the correct way.
Thank you. A little bit of a follow-up to that from Dave Dahl. How do you oppose these measures without coming off as unsympathetic to the people supporting them? And also, there sure are plenty of alleged bad apples out there in Minneapolis and Kenosha and Chicago. What is the impact on how effective your message is?
Well, I think what we are expressing today is that there's a better way to go about this. And this bill in its form does not get the job done. It does not give faith to the men and women of Illinois that they will be made safe. It does not give confidence to the men and women, the 99% of the men and women who wear the badge, who do the job. They're doing it honestly and they do it nobly. They are demoralized. So I will say this, that anyone in law enforcement, whether they are on duty or off duty, commits a crime, they need to be held accountable like everyone else. Murder is murder. And what's happened up in Minneapolis is a tragedy. It should never occurred. And that police officer needs to be held accountable for what he did. Every police officer, if they are going to break away from their mandate and do things that are in violation of the law, they are no different than anyone else, any other citizen. But you can't do it under this form. And I will just say this, that the people that were involved in drafting the bill, I'm not sure if they understood all the concepts that are in it. And not maybe the concepts, but the way it was drafted. Pat will know that when we're in a court, we have to go and we have to wordsmith. We got to look through every word and we have to use it and try to determine what exactly the intent of the legislature was. Words mean something, not concepts. So the way that this bill has been put together with not only just the police reform, but also the certification issues, it creates a very inoperable, inconsistent document that will be, if not impossible, very difficult for anyone in the law enforcement business, judges, defense attorneys, prosecutors, and even the pretrial service officers to be able to figure out what the heck this means. It just doesn't work. I want something to work. I want to be with a good police reform bill. I've done this in the past. I've done it years ago when our death penalty system was collapsing. I will keep an open mind. I will work with the governor. I will sit with the governor. I will go through this line by line with him if that's necessary. But this would be an absolute travesty to not only law enforcement, but to law-abiding citizens of Illinois, because this is not going to protect our public, particularly at a time when Chicago is the murder capital of the United States, and we clearly are the carjacking capital of the United States as well, and that's not going away soon.
the federal courts don't use cash bail. You're either held awaiting trial or you're home. Why is this bill different or, in your opinion, worse?
Well, I don't practice in the federal arena, but we're talking 3 different districts in the state of Illinois that handle, up until recently, handled mainly white collar types of transactions, financial crimes, and periodically some drug cases. We have 102 counties in Illinois that are responsible for, law enforcement's responsible for every violation of the criminal code in Illinois. We will have on a daily basis, I'll just use Cook County as my background. On a daily basis, you have maybe 300 or 400 people that are picked up overnight that are going through a process for misdemeanors and felonies. In the federal court system, you may get a handful. It's just a question of volume. You have to be able to, there is a presumption of cash bail under this bill, and that it's up to prosecutors to be able to determine whether or not a revocation hearing is something that they need to move forward with. This is not a bond hearing. It's not a trial. Under the courts, under the Supreme Court, it is just a determination of whether or not there's probable cause to detain. That has not changed. That is the Supreme Court in Gerstein versus Dahl. And we just need to remember that. And you know what? I don't think in the federal court, a victim to testify at a bond hearing like this bill is going to do. To me, that is a tragedy. And it is a sad state of affairs if that is going to be part of the law of Illinois.
Okay, the Center Square question for law enforcement members. If the governor signs this, what does this do to the morale of police in Illinois? Do you fear this will keep good people from joining the ranks or sticking around in Illinois to be a law enforcement officer? That question's for you, Joe.
Thank you very much. Yes, I believe it's going to have a severe impact on the rank and file, both to want to apply for the job and be a police officer, and the ability of retention as far as police officers sticking around. If a police officer doesn't have a trooper, I'm going to speak for what I know, and that's the state police, which I'm sure it affects all law enforcement. But if a new officer with just a couple years on is subject to some of the things in this bill, then they may be apt to leave to another state. Like I said, I've already had a handful of calls from young officers, 1 and 2 years on, that are very concerned about this legislation and its impact on their ability to do their job for their safety and the safety of the people that they're protecting. If this were to pass, I believe that you would have an exit of some amount of those individuals, as well as in our ranks. In the late 90s, early 2000s, there were several classes that came through, at least 200 or 300 officers, I would guess. I was in one of those classes. We had 104 officers graduate. So there is a large number of state police officers that are eligible. They're vested. They can retire now. And I have a concern in talking with my membership that they may start a mass exit if, in fact, this legislation was passed, which is very concerning. I want to touch real quick. I'm going to roll back on police reform and what could be accepted. You know, as far as we're concerned, there were things in this bill that are acceptable for law enforcement officers. The first responder deflection program, new training, as the representatives have spoke of, though, new training requires funding. So that's a problem. Submitting to the FBI database, is not a terrible thing. There is 2 different duty to intervene languages that are concerning, very concerning, because they're conflicting language. And to put out a bill that already has conflicting language, and it makes absolutely no sense to myself or my members. You don't put out a bill that is sloppy from the get-go. We support duty to render aid, and a lot of these things the Illinois State Police already does. My members already do. They are already one of the best trained agencies in the nation. Now, the problem with this bill in that aspect is that it's not a one-size-fits-all. You know, there are small agencies that can't afford the training, can't afford the cameras. Cameras are a great thing. 9 times out of 10, they're going to protect my officers. And they will be, you know, exonerated of a lot of allegations based on their training and their ability to do their jobs. So I just want to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. From NPR, advocates of eliminating cash bail say it allows judges to keep violent criminals in jail pre-trial without them having the option of being released on bail. So how does the system now address someone that may be moneyed, but a threat taking advantage of cash bail and causing harm while out? I think, Patrick, you might know more about this.
Sure. Under the system right now, a person can be held without bail if they commit a serious offense, first-degree murder, capital offense, or a certain non-probationable offenses. So that already exists in the law. The other thing is, if that's serious enough, of course, the judge can set a very high cash bond. And then also to those who aren't able to afford bond, our system already allows for a recognizance bond in those situations where someone is not a risk to others or is not a threat to commit future crimes or threat to public safety. That exists, happens every day in every courtroom across the state. So, you know, while I understand there are issues in the system that need to be addressed and analyzed, the system has these processes in place that we can use already without having to completely upend it. I would note, 3 years ago, we reformed our bond system in the state. And it created some issues that I've heard of in talking with state's attorneys and law enforcement officers. That has not been studied statewide to see what impact that had. We should have at least seen what that last reform did before we start passing new reforms. Did that last reform do what we intended it to do, the legislature intended? Did it accomplish a reduction in those people being held pre-trial, which was one of the stated intentions? We don't know because there was no statewide analysis of that reform. So to me, the system we have has been reformed 3 years ago. We need to see what has happened with those reforms and use the processes we have to keep violent criminals behind bars.
Thank you. From WMAY, is there a need to address the issue of poor defendants staying behind bars while wealthier ones can bond out? Is there an alternative to address that issue?
Well, I think that Pat Windhorst kind of just addressed this, but going back to 2017, this is something that myself and Governor Rauner both addressed. And I was a sponsor of the House bill, which would allow for courts to revisit bonds for low-level, low-income defendants who are sitting in the county jail. And we are still trying to determine, as Pat said, of how that process has worked. But we did address that. But again, even though a person may not have the means to get out of county jail, it depends on what the crime is that they've committed, or they've been alleged to have committed. If a person is sitting there in a low-level strictly a possession offense, for a controlled substance, they don't need to be held unless there's a history of that person with multiple infractions with the law. Then maybe a person who has a history of not appearing in court, then maybe that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. But if that person who's of low means has committed a rape or a murder, I am not going to say that they should be given special circumstances because of their income level. You need to be able to make an assessment at a bond hearing of whether or not a person is a threat to society and what is their likelihood to be able to appear in the future hearings. But the current system, we've made great strides of trying to reduce the jail populations, and we've done that. Cook County is down to about 4,000 inmates right now from a peak from maybe 5 or 6 years ago of 13,000, from about 10,000. So there is reform going on, and again, going even further, and that we're going to eliminate in the presumption of no cash bail. There were consequences that we're going to have to be ready for. It has not worked in the state of New York. The state of New York tried this a couple of years ago. Now they are backpedaling because there have been too many individuals who were let go on this no cash bail requirement, who were picked up for violent crimes. And I just gave a couple examples of that poor soul from the Chicago Fire Department who was murdered in broad daylight by two adults and two juveniles. And the two adults were on recognizance bonds for violent crimes in Cook County. So, the there's a balance. There is a balance, but because someone doesn't have the money to bond out, doesn't mean that they should be. It depends on what the crime that they've been charged with.
From Mike Militich at Quincy Media Group, Governor Pritzker continuously says he supports all of the Black Caucus proposals. How do you think he'll be able to change his mind and actually veto the bill?
Well, I'm just going to say this. I'm going to speak to one. If Pat maybe want to get into the other ones, he needs to read the bill, and he needs to talk to somebody who understands this system. Now, Governor Pritzker has not had any background in the criminal justice system as a prosecutor or defense attorney like Pat and I have, but I will offer up my time to go through the bill line by line with the governor to give him not only the legal analysis, but also the consequences of what would happen if this bill was to go into law. And I think he would be well served to sit with someone who's going to be able to explain how this is going to work in a practical, real life situation in a courthouse. He needs to review that, not go through the bullet points or the concepts that have been floated around. It's the actual language is what counts. And the governor needs to know exactly, word by word, what is in this bill. It's important because this deals with our greatest responsibility, and that is protecting our citizens, which I believe will be compromised if this bill does go into law.
Okay, and then we're not off topic here. Speaker Welch canceled session for all but one day of February. This comes after the General Assembly went over 200 days without meeting. What message do you think canceling session yet again sends to the people of Illinois? And what do you say to the people in Illinois who are wondering if you are all ever going to get back to work?
Well, I hope we do. I spoke with Speaker Welch over the weekend, and he indicated that we are going to return on the 10th, and that is to vote on the rules. And I'm pleased that Speaker Welch is allowing for Republicans to provide input on the House rules. But what will be important is that one of the things that we both brought up is that we must change the rules to allow for virtual committee hearings and actions by the legislature. We cannot go longer down this road without having any type of work done of a substantive nature. Because we don't know when this pandemic is going to finish, when we're going to get the all clear sign. But we need to change the rules, but it has to be a balanced approach towards the rules if he wants my support. But I do believe changing the rules to allow for us to participate and do committee hearings is a good step forward. But we have been ready to go back to work for some time. If planes are flying all over the United States, Targets and Walmarts are operating freely, we can do the same inside the Capitol. And we got to get back to we can do this. We have to get back to work. We can do it in a fair, healthy, safe manner. The rest of society is figuring out ways to be able to ensure that people's safety and health will never be compromised. We can do the same in the House.
All right, and then one last question. Why would from Dean Olson at the SJR, why would the Cook County State's Attorney support this bill in light of the information you presented about Chicago and Cook County?
Wow. One of the finest moments of my life was serving as a prosecutor with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office at the Layton Courthouse, 26 in California. Our mission was to seek the truth and to make sure that people who commit crimes are held accountable for that, because we do live in a violent society. When I found out that the State's Attorney of Cook County was supportive of this legislation, it made me really think about what is the mission of that office at this moment. Is it to protect victims in society, or is it to perhaps play as a neutral arbiter? That's not the job of the State's Attorney's Office, and I've been critical of her in her position on criminal justice. We can all work towards criminal justice reform, but at the end of the day, the State's Attorney of any county has a responsibility to faithfully execute their duties, and that's to prosecute and investigate cases of crime, whether they're violent or not, for the safety and for the benefit of the people of that county. So I'm disappointed that the State's Attorney of Cook and Lake County have taken a position contrary to 100 other state's attorneys throughout the state of Illinois. And Pat, maybe, I don't know if you can speak to the state's attorneys throughout the state of Illinois' thoughts on that issue?
Well, that's exactly right, Leader Durkin. We had, during some of the subject matter hearings, representatives from the state's attorneys coalition, or their committee, particularly Justin Hood, who's from Southern Illinois, and they expressed their major concerns with this bill and the problems they believe it is going to cause with public safety and the criminal justice system. You know, a prosecutor's duty is to seek justice, and this bill is going to make it difficult for prosecutors to achieve justice in many circumstances, I'm afraid.
All right, so that was all the questions we're able to get to in this time frame. I know that a lot of you have some other questions. So first off, please email me if you can, your follow-up questions that you need answers to so we can get them to you. Also, I know we threw a lot of information at you guys on various aspects of this bill. If you need citations for the bill, for specific language that we reference, please again, email me and I will get you guys all of that information. So with that, thank you all for joining us, to the representatives and to President Moon. Thank you all. And if you need anything from us, just please contact me as usual.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.